So that's the perfect segue, going from these endocrine effects that are now being evaluated to speak to our next speaker, who is the pioneer in making us aware of endocrine effects. We're actually very excited to have Dr. Theo Colborn here. She has been honored by Time Magazine as a global environmental hero. Dr. Colborn is president of the Endocrine Disruptor Exchange and professor emeritus at the University of Florida. She is the author of numerous scientific publications about compounds that interfere with hormones and other chemical messengers that control development in wildlife and humans. Her incisive research has demonstrated that endocrine disrupting chemicals alter development of the fetus in the womb by interfering with our natural hormonal signals directing fetal growth. If you haven't read it, you should read this book. She is co-author of the groundbreaking 1996 book, Our Stolen Future. It's a wonderful book, which all of you should read if you haven't. I hope most of you have. Her work has prompted the enactment of new laws around the world. I'm very excited and delighted to welcome Dr. Theo Colborn to speak to you.
Can you hear me? Okay. Well, 20 years ago, in September of 1991, an eclectic group of highly prestigious international scientists with biology backgrounds released a consensus statement in which they said they were certain that there were large amounts of chemicals already released into the environment that could damage the endocrine system in humans and wildlife. And then they went on to say they were confident that if the environmental load of these chemicals were not abated, there would be widespread disruption at the population level. And it was at that meeting where the words endocrine disruption were coined. Now, before I go any further, I want to make sure that everyone in this room knows what the endocrine system is. Also, you all know what ED is, right? Erectile dysfunction. Well, I'm going to use the term a lot throughout this talk because I'm going to say, instead of saying endocrine disruption, I will say ED often. Don't think of erectile dysfunction. But erectile dysfunction is an effect of endocrine disruption. So, okay? All right. So it is a lot more than the sex organs and the tissues that make up the reproductive organs that you see and hear about every day in the news. And it is a very exquisite communication system that uses chemicals called hormones and enzymes to control the function of practically every vital organ in the body. So let's start at the top with the brain, with pituitary and the hypothalamus that act like a thermostat. They control the levels of hormones throughout your body. They do this by reading the concentrations of the hormones in your blood as it courses through your brains. And if your hormone level is getting low, they signal the organs to produce more, or if too high, to produce less. They also shut down receptors in the target tissue where the organs do their job if there are too many hormones, and also turn on those receptors when they're needed. So a chemical does not necessarily have to get to the gonads in order to affect them. It could target the brain, this part of the brain, and have it send the wrong signals to the gonads. The hippocampus is the one I worry about the most. It is also a piece of the brain anatomy. The hippocampus is exceptionally important because it separates us from all other organisms. It is here where we get our ability to love, to parent, to feel compassion and empathy, and bond with others, to actually look into each other's eye, while we are simultaneously communicating. It is here we get the gift of being able to process information and to arrive at some conclusions about the consequences of what we are seeing, hearing, and doing. And then there is the thyroid in the neck, another organ that affects the development of the brain and determines intelligence, as well as reproductive ability and metabolism. Now, the arrow is missing for the thymus, I'm sorry, an important part of the immune system, as we heard, that protects us from viral infections and other foreign matter. And we're learning a lot more about its role in terms of endocrine disruption. And then on the top of the kidneys are the adrenal glands that, in response to stress, produce corticosteroids and neurotransmitters, and also that very first whisper of testosterone to the male embryo that he needs if he's going to reach sexual maturity. And then there's aldosterone, a hormone that plays a part in maintaining normal blood pressure. Now, extending across the upper abdomen is the pancreas, where insulin is produced, where today it is obvious to so many people suffering from diabetes and obesity that endocrine disruption is taking place. And then we hit those glands that separate men from women, which you all learned about watching the birds and the bees, and more recently on television. I'm not going to waste my time on them. So let's get back to the meeting in 1991 and review some of what the experts heard in order to understand what prompted those two provocative statements. Very early on in the meeting, they found out that the endocrine system operates at concentrations as low as parts per billion and parts per trillion, and even at 1/10 of a part per trillion in the uterus. This chilling information was reinforced when they heard about the fragile fetus by one of the most highly respected comparative endocrinologists in the world. They were presented endless evidence about the disappearance of wildlife in the Northern Hemisphere. They were informed that the thyroid glands were abnormal in almost every bird and fish that had been studied around the Great Lakes, and that many male gulls on the Great Lakes and along the Pacific coast had both male and female organs and were not parenting well. This was linked to PCBs in a dozen or so persistent pesticides found in all the affected animals. Chemicals all derived from the processing of petrochemicals using benzene and chlorine. The wild animal mothers were dosing their youngsters with these man-made chemicals while they were still in the womb or through the eggs they were laying. The experts also based their prediction on the very disturbing evidence that the brains were being altered of the human infants and children, whose mothers passed on to them elevated levels of PCBs from their bodies while they were pregnant, altering their progeny's behavior and stealing their intelligence. The EPA at that time had just done some rat studies that linked these functional problems with thyroid hormone disturbances as a result of exposure to the PCBs. And then the attendees had just heard about the disturbing life changes in the men and women whose mothers took DES, from abnormal maturational development to psychological and reproductive disorders. These DES studies provided evidence of damage at the molecular and cellular level, as well as at the individual human level, and were confirmed with human epidemiological studies. Now, although the scientists warned that unless we stop releasing toxic chemicals in the environment, there would be widespread dysfunction, little did they foresee that in less than 20 years, the human race would be suffering from pandemics of disorders that were the result of damage to the endocrine system. Disorders like those on this list. 1 in 100, 1 in 110 children being born today with autism, 1 in 59 boys, 27% or more basically more than a quarter of the population is obese. 1 in every 3rd child born today is going to develop diabetes. In 2010, the cost of just providing medication for these individuals was $174 billion. Infertility, if you want to make money, invest in a fertility clinic. Yes, even Alzheimer's has been traced back to the womb. And of course, the incidence of early onset of testicular cancer, prostate, breast, and ovarian cancers have been very, very clearly now demonstrated as a result of prenatal exposure. And even as the results of prenatal exposure has been shown, even as a result of postnatal exposure in some cases, clearly has been demonstrated now in laboratory animals, like in the case of diabetes and obesity, but also we all know well with pesticides and Parkinson's disease. But often overlooked on the consensus statement was a footnote at the bottom of the first page. And it was a list of 30 chemicals and chemical classes which at that time fit the new term endocrine disruptors. 1/2 of the chemicals on the list were pesticides and or pesticide classes. All were spin-offs from the petrochemical processing and were persistent in the environment. And over the years, many, many more ED lists have been released by all sorts of organizations, state and government agencies, and even at the national and international level. One of the longest lists of EDs was generated by the European Union. Now, several years ago, Dr. Lynn Carroll, who manages TEDx's huge database, mentioned that she had been collecting all those assorted lists and sorting them away in our in-house database that we call Monster. She also opined that she would probably never get the time to merge them into one Excel spreadsheet to produce a complete validated list. Well, boy, that sounded like a good idea to me. And why all Lynn had to do was dump them into one big Excel spreadsheet and have it sort them in alphabetical order, remove duplications, and post them on the internet as the validated list. And then from then on, in our office, we would finally be able to respond to people when they called our office for an official ED list. We would have something for them at last. Well, it all sounded so easy to me, but when I mentioned that to Lynn, in her good-natured way, she smiled and she rolled her eyes. And she said, maybe. And she knew a lot better than I did what she was getting into. What Lynn realized, and I didn't, was that there were at least 1,000 different chemicals on that combined list. And it was not an easy job to merge all those lists of the hundreds of PCB, dioxin, furan, and phthalate congeners and isomers with long chemical names, some with 3 or 4 names. And then on top of that, so that we could be sure we were doing everything right, she had to find the specific chemical abstract service number for every one of those chemicals. So we could definitely talk about a specific chemical and not vaguely get into trouble. But then when she began to check the many citations that had been used to determine that a chemical was indeed an ED, she really ran into a big problem. She found a great deal of difference among the citations from one list to another, and many incorrect citations. They were even citing negative studies. This all led to having to get a hold of and read every paper cited to see if it was correct. So for her list of about 1,000 chemicals, for which many had several citations, Lynn had to read them all. Now, for the new combined list, she accepted only peer-reviewed papers describing primary research. She used no review papers or abstracts for lectures presented at meetings or newspapers and magazine articles. And then to meet our internal quality assurance rule at TEDx. Before Lynn finished validating the list, one other staff member also had to read all the papers and agree with Lynn. And then there were a couple of times when a third staff member was called in to help to make a decision about the quality of the peer review. She's our epidemiologist, toxicologist. Epidemiologist, statistician. Take that back. So you are probably wondering where we are with this list. Well, we still have not been able to verify every chemical on the merged list, and we are way behind on adding new chemicals. Like this past week, I just found over a dozen new tin compounds that aren't on the list, that were never cited in any of those papers, that we're going to have to add. These are, by the way, are pesticides. But that could go on forever. So after we decided we were going to come to this meeting, we finally came to the conclusion that we just had to pick a date and release what was done by then. And then on a regular basis, we would post our lists afterwards. And of course, we chose the date of this meeting to release it. Well, have you ever heard of Murphy's Law? Poor Lynn. 2 weeks ago, when she finally got to the point where she was trying to put it into a list that would get into the internet, be internet accessible, people could play with it, do the statistics they wanted, anything they wanted, her computer flipped back and burned out. Yep. So we were held up for quite a while. So instead today, I am announcing the birth of our new baby. And it will soon be on the internet. We hope maybe before the end of this week or early 2 weeks if more things don't pop up. We actually would like to try it on a few people first to make sure we have made it as easy to use as possible, internet accessible. So we may be calling on somebody here to look at it and share it with us. But anyway, so this is how it's going to appear on our website. But so far, there are 815 chemicals on that verified list, of which 276 are pesticides. And if we were to lump all the PCB congeners and dioxin isomers and phthalate congeners as just 3 chemicals, the pesticides would comprise a much larger percentage of chemicals that are on this list. But keep in mind, what we have now is only a skeleton. It is a list of chemicals for which the original citations have been validated. We did not try to find another citation if the original citation was good. We didn't have the time. In many cases, you will see among the citations the names of the pioneers who broke through the bounds of toxicology before we ever had the term endocrine disruption, and gross endpoints like birth defects, and began to look at the overt role chemicals were playing with the construction, function, behavior, and the quality of lives of our children. The list clearly reflects the history of how endocrine disruption evolved into a discipline. It reflects that a lot of early work, and even up to today, was funded by the NIEHS through extramural grants to college professors on campuses across the country, and similarly through grants to universities by other national health organizations around the world. Not much money a year, a couple $1 million, maybe $4 million. Really, I mean, it came in dribbles and drabs. The list also reflects the suppression of endocrine disruption research across government agencies in this country by well-placed political appointees in key positions of decision-making, like the OMB and EPA, up at that managerial level. It also shows that this information basically was supported by efforts of the trade associations and the corporations were behind this. But it begins to show how today the bulk of the data are coming from collaborations with one or more U.S. scientists working with teams of scientists from other countries around the world. That is the only way recently some scientists in this country have been able to hang in there and get the money to keep their research going. The list also reflects the maturing of the knowledge about ED that reveals simple and many new endocrine disruption mechanisms moving well beyond estrogenicity. A lot of this is going to be estrogenicity. You know, everybody uses the MCF7 one way or the other. The citations also reveal an increasing ED research program progressing across Asia, well beyond Japan. Japan was in this in the beginning, but boy, it has spread across Asia. It's amazing. So, now what we are looking at now, and where's my little pointer? It's here somewhere. I got it buried. No, I have it right here. There it is. Okay. What we have now, and we'll be putting up, will be the chemical name, the alternative name, the CAS number, the citation, and then, the citations. Can you see some names there? Okay, good. That's all you're going to get now. Okay? So, we want to add more columns. So we want to add over here by class. But you know, when you start trying to break chemicals into class, is it by use? Is it by chemical class? These are some of the things we have to work out. And there may be duplications and overlaps. Okay. And we want to also add XR, what we've been able to get out of the literature, but also whether it's in vitro or in vivo. In other words, was it just done in a petri dish? Was it done in an animal? And if it was done in humans, it'll be there as well. And then also, here we are, the animals and the assays that was used. A lot of this kind of data are now available because old chemicals are now actually being tested again. So a lot of the chemicals that are on the list may be just there for thyroid. You'll find out, turn up with a lot of other health effects linked with them as well. Lynn wanted me to point out that the pesticides we show here are all on EPA's list of the top 24 most frequently used pesticides, and she has not given up yet looking for data on the other 8 that are not on this list. But to get a better idea of where ED research should be moving, let's take a look at chlorpyrifos. And I did not get in touch with Carolyn, and I didn't get in touch with you. But for some reason, no, chlorpyrifos is that chemical that we've been worried about for so long. So I can't thank both of you for setting me up. Really, Dana, it was wonderful. So let's jump back for a minute to what we know about normal development from fertilization to birth. These columns coming up and down here are the 38 weeks of gestation. The little ticks on these bars coming across, and I'm going to have to come around here to read this probably, but we've got the brain up the top, and I think we have a male and female, right? Is that what I got here? You can see the various systems that we had to break it out into. But for each one of those ticks, you can tick on that, and a citation will pop up, and it will tell you right here, Leydig cells begin producing testosterone at approximately day 1 of week 8, and then it gives a citation. And if you're lucky and it's on PubMed, you can click on it and you'll pull up the peer-reviewed paper. So this is available now. We call this our critical windows of development. But what I want to point out here is, isn't this a disgrace? This is all we know about human development in the womb. I mean, this is positively sad. We know more about outer space than we know about inner space in this country. And actually, an inner space research program should be funded and given as much attention as outer space is. I can't understand why we're trying to go out there when we don't know anything about this. This is minimal. Okay, but can we go on to the next one? So, chlorpyrifos, of course, has been on our list for a long time. Mothers, rats or mice, when the rat mothers and mice were dosed with chlorpyrifos, you'll see across the top now we have comparable weeks for when the mice end gestation, where the rat ends gestation, and where the humans end gestation. So when we talk about this in terms of the result, we're talking about the interpretation from the male or female animal to the male or female human. So in this case, the thing that amazed me was, look at these ticks for chlorpyrifos. You get over here where you've got multiple ticks like this. This tick alone, when you hit that, you'll get 17 citations. There are so many citations behind the ticks on this, and they'll pop up. And here is just one. And can you read it all so I don't have to read it to you? So, okay, good, because I don't want to walk around here and get in your way, and I'm using up my time. Okay, anyway, but look at how vulnerable the brain is. And that was the thing that I wanted to point out here. But what surprised me most was that with this, we popped this one up down here under hormones. Look what popped up. This would have been equivalent to the 20th week in humans, and this is what we found. So I think it was increasing triglycerides, let me see, cholesterol and insulin, and in males only. Okay. Now, the amount of information about the development effects of chlorpyrifos is exceptional. And it is only because of sheer luck and the efforts of Dr. Ted Slotkin at Duke University. If over the years Dr. Slotkin had not mentored graduate students from South America, and with financial support through extramural grants from their home countries, we would never have been able to provide a picture like this about chlorpyrifos. Yet, as we know, why are we still using chlorpyrifos? EPA isn't even looking at these health effects to do risk assessment or even evaluate the safety of pesticides. So keep in mind that there are not enough scientists out there doing ED research to get on top of the problem. Campuses are still teaching traditional toxicology. Actual courses in endocrine disruption are rare. It is more faculty-driven. It more depends upon the professor on the campus about whether we're getting endocrine disruption research. It is not institutionally driven. Consequently, the kind of technicians needed in commercial laboratories to test chemicals for endocrine disruption are few and far between. All we have now is an emergent, independent scattering of labs, mostly academic, around the world, under the guidance of progressive professors who are expanding endocrine disruption research and graduating a handful of students each year. But recruitment cannot be met at this pace. And most important, EPA needs the authority to take this kind of information and stop the production of this chemical immediately. But until a Toxic Substance Control Act is written that directly addresses endocrine disruption and does not hide under the guise of toxicology, dangerous pesticides will continue to be used, and new, incompletely tested pesticides will come on the market. So in closing, I would like to remind you, excuse me, that a vast number of manufacturing plants around the world are regularly producing tons and tons of pesticides and other endocrine disruptors made with benzene every day. And I want to ask you one question. Have you ever given any thought to where all that benzene is coming from? I don't see anybody shaking their head. Okay. Well, guess what? It is coming up from the ground in the millions of gallons of crude oil and the millions of cubic feet of natural gas that are mined every day, 24/7, around the world. Benzene has to be stripped off both those products before they can be used. This very toxic, hazardous energy waste product, benzene, is in essence has become the mother of endocrine disruption. Now, recently I chatted with an old man. Yes, I know I'm very old, but he's a lot older than me. He graduated with a BS in chemistry in the early 40s. And he got a job working at an oil refinery and looked up and actually worked his way up to be chief chemist. But he was not happy there. And he finally got the nerve to change his career. Well, he's a French horn player. But anyway. But he told me that he can still see the long line of train tanker cars loaded with benzene that left that refinery every day. And how he has always wondered where they were going and what was it going to be done with it. Well, he met me, and now he knows that the large volumes of poisonous benzene waste and other products from fossil fuel refineries have been converted into diverse, covert, poisonous compounds called endocrine disruptors for over 70 years. And as one looks at how fast the health and well-being of humans has collapsed in just the last 20 years, as we move into the third and fourth generation of people exposed, we have to ask ourselves if fossil fuel-derived endocrine disruption is not posing a more imminent threat to humankind than climate change. The climate change scientists are giving us until the end of this century. Well, the abatement of endocrine disruptors in the environment cannot wait another 20 years, not another generation. Humanity is at risk. So if you're looking for practical solutions to create a healthier world, it is quite apparent that we need to immediately shift to alternative energy and start weaning ourselves from fossil fuels and make it impossible to have more pesticides. And I want to thank you. Oh, leave it there. But let me tell you. Just one thing. I could not have done any of this without Carol. And Carol is also a senior scientist. Lynn, Carol, and then Kim Schultz is she's our natural gas gal. And Chris Ribbons, our administrative assistant. But one thing I want to say is I am very serious. We need help. And we are looking for more staff scientists. And we have an opening in natural gas, too, because you'd be surprised of the 365 or 650 chemicals that they're using in natural gas. Almost 43% of them are endocrine disruptors. But most of the stuff they're using would not have been tested this way anyway. So we have an opening, and you now have seen their pictures. They're here. We're going to be here. And if you know of people who are qualified, who might be interested in this kind of work, let us know. And our office is just over the hill. It's about a 5-hour drive to God's country. Gorgeous. And it's a wonderful little small, very progressive town. As Carol said yesterday, we got them to stop spraying us. Carol did that all herself. And so let us know, okay? Oh, pardon me? Oh, we have a table outside, too. And there's a DVD there that basically I got through an environmental justice grant from EPA on what you need to know about natural gas development. They're using it to train their people. It's now, we're coming into our 8,000th of them that we've distributed, and it's being interpreted, it's being but dubbed now in Europe, in French and in German. So you want to see that. And then this is our website, okay? Very easy to go to, and you'll get a better picture because every picture on that we took ourselves, and all those pictures were taken in our valley. Okay.
We have time for a few questions for Dr. Colborn.
Oh, good. I didn't run over.
It's okay. Any questions for her?
How does all this, knowing all this information, make you feel?
Make me feel?
Yes.
I'm fighting mad. I'm very old. I'm not going to live much longer, but I'm going to fight to the bitter end. I'm mad. You know, but one other thing. I'm still a kid. We're so curious. Every little bit of information that we get in adds to this. It's amazing what we have. The evidence is there, and don't let industry fool you. And when they say natural gas is the clean energy, it's probably one of the dirtiest. With coal, you have a discrete hole in the ground. Wherever you pull gas out of the ground, you're leaving a Superfund site behind, and you're making people sick all around where that work is being done. It's being completely ignored. And they're hanging it up on fracking, which, yeah, fracking may get us, but it's going to take many, many years for the fracking to get into the water that we're so concerned about. But it's happening now. The minute they start drilling, people get sick right away. So, yes.
I just want to make people, can you hear me? I just want to make people aware that I was at a golf gathering on the Gulf Coast a few weeks ago. I have petitions here to actually use BP fines to restore the ecosystems of the Gulf and not to build roads and things like that. And if you would sign it, I'd appreciate it. The Gulf is in terrible catastrophe because of the oil spill, and also the industry would want us to think it's over, but it's not.
The interesting thing there is that the health effects that they're seeing on the people in the Gulf, same thing up here. Same chemicals, dispersants, ethanol, if anybody's ever heard of it, and the aldehydes and the acetates, for which EPA does not have the assays to detect these things at the concentrations we are seeing them in the environment. I mean, we have a real tough road ahead, but I'm glad you brought that up, because we're merging our work with the gang that are working on the ground and doing all the environmental justice work around there, because it's the off-site people that get sick. The riggers, you know, keep moving on. They only need 16 men on a rig, but it's the people that have to live with this stuff 24/7 around the clock and doing all the work, and they leave an infrastructure behind that requires a truck 2 or 3 times a day. Trucks have to go to every one of those well pads and take that dirty water and drive it somewhere. And these truck drivers stand there and inhale the gases that are coming out of the tanks. When they're loading it, they smell it. When they're dumping it into the pits, and the truck drivers are just dropping like flies. But they're subcontractors. Nobody works directly for the major corporations. None of these people have health insurance. They have no recourse. It's a shame, truly. Okay, you gave me a chance.